Tonight I'm reading Chapter 7 from Fiddler on the Roof. We begin the first day of departure. Lists, bundles, the arithmetic of what to carry, and the ache of what must be left. I'll keep the pace hushed and steady as love, duty, and the long road ahead take shape in the soft pre-dawn light. Settle in, and I'll read you gently towards sleep. Chapter 7. The Geography of Exile. The first of our 3 days began before dawn, though in truth it had never really ended, the night having dissolved into a sleepless vigil of calculation and recrimination, of sorting through possessions and memories, with the brutal triage of those who must choose what part of their lives to amputate in order to save what remains. I stood in our main room, surrounded by the accumulated artifacts of a lifetime. No, of multiple lifetimes, for here were objects that had belonged to my parents, my grandparents, stretching back through generations of Tevyes who had somehow managed to pass down not just genes, but things, physical anchors to a continuity that was about to be severed with the casual violence of bureaucratic decree. The butter churn that had been my grandmother's wedding gift stood in the corner, too heavy to take, too valuable to leave, existing in that impossible category of things that were simultaneously essential and abandonable. Beside it, the books, the holy books that were our portable homeland, the volumes of Talmud and Torah that we would carry regardless of their weight, because they contain not just words, but the entire architecture of our identity. And scattered throughout, the smaller items whose value was entirely sentimental, and therefore both worthless and priceless. A child's first shoe, preserved for reasons that made sense only to a parent's heart. A wedding cup, cracked but retained. Letters from relatives in America, their promises of better lives reading now like prophecies or lies, depending on one's degree of optimism. "We can take only what we can carry," Golde said, entering the room with an armload of clothing that she deposited on our already cluttered table. Her face bore the expression of someone performing emotional arithmetic, calculating the exchange rate between memory and mobility, between preservation and survival. "The cart will hold some furniture, but not much. We must be practical." Practical. The word seemed simultaneously necessary and obscene, as though one could apply logic to the dismantling of a life, as though there were a proper methodology for becoming refugees in one's own existence. Yet what else could we do? Sentiment was a luxury we could no longer afford, along with so many other luxuries we hadn't even realized we possessed until they were about to be taken from us. The luxury of familiarity, of knowing every stone in every street, of belonging somewhere so completely that the belonging itself became invisible, like air that one only notices when it begins to disappear. "Where will we go?" Sprintsu asked, her 12-year-old face bearing an expression of curiosity rather than fear, as though this were an adventure rather than an exile. The resilience of children, their ability to adapt to catastrophe, as though it were merely another variation in the game of existence, both heartened and heartbroken me. "Where God leads us," I replied, though in truth I had no idea where that might be. The world beyond Anatevka, which had always existed as a vague threat or promise on the periphery of our consciousness, was about to become our reality, and we were as prepared for it as fish are prepared for flight. "Perchik says we should go to Warsaw," Hodel announced, and there was something in her voice, a quality of decision rather than suggestion, that made me look at her more carefully. She stood straighter than usual, her chin lifted with a determination I recognized, but had hoped not to see, At least not so soon, not under these circumstances. Perchik says many things, I observed, attempting to keep my tone neutral. What else does Perchik say? He says there's work in Warsaw, in the factories. He says there's a community of people like us, people who believe in change, in progress, in revolution, I finished for her. Yes, I'm sure Warsaw is full of revolutionaries. Very comforting for a family seeking stability. Stability? Hadel's voice rose with the passion of youth confronting what it perceives as willful blindness. Papa, we're being expelled from our homes. Where exactly is this stability you're seeking? She had a point, though I was reluctant to concede it. The old certainties were crumbling so rapidly that even our arguments against change were becoming obsolete before we could properly articulate them. It was then that Kava appeared in the doorway, and I knew immediately that something had shifted. Some internal decision had been made that would alter everything that followed. She wore her traveling clothes, practical, simple, but there was something about the way she carried herself, a quality of resolution that transformed her from my daughter into someone I wasn't sure I recognized. I need to speak with you, she said, and though her voice was quiet, it carried an authority that made everyone else in the room find reasons to be elsewhere. Even Golde, after a moment's hesitation and a meaningful look in my direction, ushered the younger girls outside, leaving me alone with this stranger who wore my daughter's face. I'm leaving with Fiedka, she said, without preamble, without the elaborate justifications or arguments I had expected, just the simple statement of fact, as though the decision had already been made and implemented in some realm beyond our physical reality, and was only now being reported to those of us still mired in the material world. No, I said, but the word emerged without force, like the last breath of a dying man. Yes, she replied, and her calm was more terrible than tears would have been. He's arranged papers for us. We'll be married by a magistrate in the next town. Then we'll go to Petersburg, where his uncle has a position at the university. He can work as a translator. You can what? I interrupted, finding my voice at last. You can be neither Jew nor Christian. You can raise children who belong nowhere. You can spend your life explaining to everyone you meet why you chose love over everything else, as though love were enough to sustain you through a lifetime of isolation. Yes, she said simply. All of that, because the alternative is to live without the person who makes life meaningful to me. And Papa, that's not living at all. I stared at my daughter, this person I had helped create but could not control, had shaped but could not contain. In her face I saw my mother's determination and my own stubbornness, saw generations of survivors who had endured persecution and poverty and somehow maintained their identity through it all. And now, she was proposing to throw all of that away for what? For a young man with beautiful eyes and 7 languages? For the promise of a different life that might be no better than the one she was abandoning? If you do this, I said slowly, each word requiring enormous effort, you will be dead to us. Do you understand? Not just separated, not just distant, dead. We will say Kaddish for you. We will tear our clothes and sit Shiva. You will cease to exist in our world. For the first time, her composure cracked slightly, a fissure in the facade through which I could glimpse the pain beneath. But it sealed itself almost immediately, her resolve hardening like scar tissue over a wound. Then I will be dead, she said. But I will have lived first. The melodrama of her statement might have been laughable under other circumstances, the theatrical declaration of a young woman who had read too many romantic novels. But there was nothing theatrical about the way she stood there, nothing false about the conviction in her voice. She meant it, every word, and that truth was more terrible than any lie could have been. Your mother, I began, but she interrupted. Mama knows. I told her this morning. She cried. Then she gave me this. She produced a small bundle, a few pieces of jewelry, nothing valuable in monetary terms, but precious beyond measure in their significance. She said it was my inheritance, that I should take it now because there would be no other opportunity. The betrayal, or was it understanding, of my wife's action hit me like a physical blow. Golde had accepted what I could not, had already begun the process of letting go while I was still desperately trying to hold on. You could wait, I said, a last desperate attempt at compromise. We're all leaving anyway. Perhaps in the new place, wherever we end up, things will be different. Perhaps is not enough, Kava said. Not when I have certainty standing right in front of me. Papa, I love you. I love this family. I love our traditions, our faith, our way of life. But I also love him, and that love is not something I can simply set aside like an outgrown dress. It's part of me now, woven into the fabric of who I am. To deny it would be to deny myself, and that's a betrayal I cannot commit. And betraying your family, your people, your God, these betrayals you can commit. I'm not betraying God, she said quietly. I'm following the path he set before me, even if it's not the path you would have chosen for me. As for family and people, I hope that someday you'll understand that love is not betrayal, that choosing a different path is not the same as rejecting where you came from. Someday, I repeated bitterly, always someday with you young people. Someday we'll understand. Someday it will all make sense. But what about today? What about now, when I have to watch my daughter walk away from everything I've tried to give her? Then today you grieve, she said, and there were tears in her eyes now, though they didn't fall. Today you rage and mourn and feel betrayed. But Papa, you're grieving anyway. You're mourning the loss of Anatevka, the end of the world you've known. I'm just adding one more loss to the pile. And maybe, in the larger scheme of catastrophes, mine is small enough to be absorbed, to eventually be forgiven if not accepted. I wanted to argue further, to marshal the theological and philosophical arguments that would prove her wrong, that would demonstrate the impossibility of what she was proposing, but the words wouldn't come. Perhaps because I was exhausted from the sleepless night and the emotional toll of our impending exile, or perhaps because, somewhere in a part of my heart I didn't want to acknowledge, I understood her position, even if I couldn't accept it. When, I asked finally, this afternoon. We'll leave before you have to watch us go. The consideration in her timing, leaving before we did so, we wouldn't have to witness her departure, was somehow worse than if she had been cruel about it. It suggested a thoughtfulness, a recognition of our pain, that made her decision seem less like childish rebellion and more like adult choice. I won't bless this union, I said. I can't. I'm not asking for your blessing, she replied, only for your understanding that I'm doing what I believe is right, even if you believe it's wrong. She stepped toward me, perhaps to embrace me, perhaps to seek some final connection, but I stepped back, unable to bridge the gap that had opened between us. She nodded, accepting this final rejection with the same calm she had displayed throughout our conversation, then turned and walked away. I stood alone in the room full of possessions we would abandon, surrounded by the physical evidence of a life that was ending in more ways than one. Through the window, I could see the activity in the street, neighbors loading carts, children crying, adults moving with the grim determination of those performing necessary but terrible tasks. The entire village was in motion, preparing for displacement, and somewhere in that chaos, my daughter was preparing to disappear from my life entirely. Golde returned to the room, moving quietly as though entering a sick room where the patient might be disturbed by sudden sound. She didn't speak, didn't ask what had transpired, but her presence was both comfort and accusation. Comfort because she was still here, still mine, still part of the world I understood. Accusation because she had given Kava the jewelry, had accepted what I could not. "You knew," I said, not a question but a statement. "I suspected," she replied. "A mother knows things, sees things, the way she looked when his name was mentioned, the way she stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped being present even when she was in the room. I knew we were losing her one way or another. And you accept it?" "Accept?" Golda's laugh was bitter, tinged with hysteria. "I accept nothing, but I recognize reality when it slaps me in the face. We're all being scattered anyway, Tevye. At least she's choosing her scattering, rather than having it chosen for her. That's supposed to be a comfort. It's supposed to be what it is, the best we can manage under impossible circumstances." We worked in silence after that, sorting and packing, making the 1,000 small decisions that exile required. Keep the Shabbos candlesticks, leave the everyday dishes, take the prayer books, abandon the furniture, preserve what was irreplaceable, surrender what was merely loved. The arithmetic of loss is complex, requiring calculations that no amount of study prepares you for. The second day brought its own challenges. News arrived that other villages were receiving the same decree, a general expulsion that suggested this was not random cruelty, but systematic policy. The roads would be clogged with refugees, all seeking the same uncertain shelters, all competing for the same limited resources. What had seemed like personal catastrophe was revealed to be communal, which was simultaneously comforting and terrifying. Comforting because we were not alone in our suffering, terrifying because it meant the scale of displacement would make finding new homes even more difficult. Perchik came to the house that morning, his usual revolutionary fervor subdued by the reality of actual revolution, the kind that destroyed rather than reformed. He and Hodel sat together at our table, their heads bent in intense discussion, and I could see they were making their own plans, their own decisions about which future to pursue. "We're going to Warsaw," Hodel announced finally, her voice carrying that same quality of resolution I had heard in Kava's. "Perchik has contacts there, people who can help us find work, lodging." "We?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "We're going to be married," she said, and there was defiance in her voice, as though she expected the same resistance I had given Kava. "Not now, not here, but soon. In Warsaw. By a rabbi," she added quickly, as though that detail might make the departure more palatable. "At least a rabbi," I muttered, but my heart wasn't in the objection. What was the point of fighting to maintain traditions that were being scattered to the winds anyway? How could I insist on the old ways when the old world was literally being demolished around us? You have my blessing, I said, surprising everyone, including myself. Not my enthusiasm, not my complete approval, but my blessing. Go to Warsaw, marry your revolutionary, try to change the world. Maybe you'll succeed, where the rest of us have failed. Hodel rose and embraced me, her tears wet against my cheek. Thank you, Papa. Thank you for understanding. I didn't tell her that understanding and accepting were different things, that I was simply too exhausted to fight multiple battles on multiple fronts. Let her believe I had evolved, had grown, had come to see the wisdom in her choice, the truth that I was simply conserving my energy for the struggles ahead was less flattering, but more honest. The rest of that second day passed in a blur of activity. The synagogue held a final service, the rabbi leading us in prayers that seemed to take on new meaning in the context of our exodus. The ancient words about exile and return, about maintaining faith in the face of adversity, about the temporary nature of all earthly suffering, resonated with an immediacy that was both comforting and painful. We were living the stories we had been telling for centuries, experiencing firsthand the displacement that had characterized Jewish existence since the destruction of the temple. It was during this service that I saw Fiedka enter the synagogue, standing uncertainly at the back, clearly unsure of his welcome, but compelled by something: respect, curiosity, love for my daughter, to witness our communal grief. Several members of the congregation turned to stare, their expressions ranging from hostility to confusion, but he remained, his presence a silent statement of what? Solidarity? Defiance? Love? I wanted to order him out, to maintain at least this boundary between us and them, but I found I didn't have the energy. Let him stand there. Let him see what his love was costing my daughter, what she was giving up for him. Let him understand the weight of the tradition he was asking her to abandon. After the service, as we filed out into the gray afternoon, he approached me. I could have walked away, could have maintained the wall of silence I had promised to erect, but something in his expression, a mixture of sorrow and determination that reminded me painfully of Kava, made me stop. I want you to know, he said quietly, that I will take care of her, that I will honor her heritage, even if I don't share it, that our children will know where their mother came from, will understand the richness of what she's left behind. Your children will be neither Jewish nor Christian, I said. There'll be something in between, belonging nowhere fully. Or they'll be both, he countered, belonging to a larger world than either of us can imagine. Pretty words, I said, but words don't change reality. No, he agreed, but sometimes reality changes, and words are all we have to describe the new world that emerges. I left him standing there, this young man who was taking my daughter into a future I couldn't envision and didn't want to imagine. But as I walked away, I found myself thinking about his words, about children who might be both rather than neither, about worlds larger than the one we were being forced to leave. It was a thought both terrifying and oddly comforting, though I couldn't have said why. The third day, our final day in Anatevka, dawned with a bitter cold that seemed appropriate to the occasion, as though even the weather was conspiring to make our departure as miserable as possible. The carts were loaded, the houses emptied of everything portable, the village transformed from a living community into a ghost town waiting to happen. We moved through the familiar streets like spirits ourselves, already half departed, existing in that liminal space between what was and what would be. I made my final rounds, not to deliver milk. There would be no more milk deliveries, but to say goodbye to the places that had defined my existence. The synagogue, where I had prayed every day of my adult life. The cemetery, where my parents lay buried, where I had assumed I too would rest someday. The well in the market square, gathering place for gossip and news, where the women would no longer gather because there would be no women, no gathering, no news worth sharing. At each stop, I found others doing the same thing, making their farewell pilgrimages, trying to imprint these places on their memories before memory was all that remained of them. We nodded to each other, these fellow mourners, but didn't speak. What was there to say that the situation didn't already articulate more eloquently than words could manage? It was at the cemetery that I found Golde, standing at her parents' graves, her lips moving in silent prayer or conversation. I stood beside her, adding my own silent words to whatever communication was occurring between the living and the dead. "We're leaving them," she said finally. "Leaving them here alone." "They're not alone," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "They have each other. And the dead don't need company the way the living do." "How do you know what the dead need?" she asked, and there was an edge to her voice that suggested this was about more than just graves and burial grounds. "I don't," I admitted. "I don't know what anyone needs anymore. The living, the dead, my own children. Everyone's needs have become mysterious to me." We stood in silence for a moment longer. Then Golde said, "She's gone. Kava. She left this morning before dawn. I heard her go." "I know," I said, though I hadn't known, not for certain. But somehow the knowledge didn't surprise me. Of course she had left in darkness, slipping away like a thief stealing herself from us. Of course she had chosen the coward's exit, or was it the merciful one? By leaving without a final confrontation, she had spared us the agony of watching her go, the temptation to try one more time to stop her, the inevitable failure of that attempt. "Should we sit Shiva?" Golde asked. "When?" I replied. "While we're walking to nowhere? While we're trying to find food and shelter? The dead deserve 7 days of mourning. We don't have 7 hours to spare." "Then she gets away without even that," Golde said bitterly. "Without the proper mourning, the proper grief." "Oh, she'll get the grief," I assured her. "It will follow us wherever we go. We'll carry it along with everything else we couldn't bear to leave behind." The afternoon came too quickly, bringing with it the moment we had all been dreading, the actual departure. The carts were lined up on the main street, families clustered around their possessions, children clinging to parents, everyone looking to everyone else, for some sign that this was really happening, that we were really leaving, that this wasn't just another rehearsal for catastrophe, but the actual catastrophe itself. The Russian officials who had come to oversee our departure stood at the edge of the village, their faces impassive, their presence a reminder that this was not voluntary, not chosen, not negotiable. We would leave because we had been ordered to leave, and if we didn't leave quickly enough, they would help us leave in ways we wouldn't like. As our pathetic caravan began to move, I looked back one last time at Anatevka this collection of humble buildings that had been our world. The fiddler was there, standing on his roof one last time, playing a melody that seemed to capture everything: the sorrow of departure, the uncertainty of the future, the stubborn persistence of hope, despite all evidence to the contrary. He would follow us, I knew, this metaphorical musician who provided the soundtrack to our existence. He would find new roofs and new places, would continue his precarious performance wherever we ended up, because that's what fiddlers do, what Jews do, what humans do. We continue despite everything. We play our music despite the danger. We maintain our balance despite the constant threat of falling. "Move along," one of the officials shouted, and we moved, our feet finding the rhythm of exile, that ancient dance our people knew so well. We walked away from Anatevka, from our homes, from the graves of our ancestors, from the daughter who had chosen a different exile. We walked toward the unknown, toward whatever awaited us beyond the horizon, toward futures we couldn't imagine in places we'd never seen. But we walked together, those of us who remained, and in that togetherness was a form of comfort. Community could be portable. Identity didn't depend on geography. Tradition could survive transplantation if tended carefully enough. We were leaving Anatevka, but we were taking with us something that couldn't be confiscated or destroyed: ourselves, our faith, our stubborn insistence on continuity despite disruption. The road stretched ahead, dusty and uncertain, leading to wherever roads lead when home is behind you and the future is unwritten. I walked beside Golde, my remaining daughters around us, Zeidel and Model just ahead, Hodel already gone to Warsaw with her revolutionary, Sprintzu and Bielku holding hands as they walked. My community scattered but present, my heart broken but beating. "Lord," I said silently as we walked, "I'm beginning to understand that you're not in the business of making things easy. Fine. We'll do this the hard way. We'll walk this road you've set before us, even if we can't see where it leads. We'll maintain our faith, even when faith seems foolish. We'll continue to be your chosen people, even when being chosen feels more like punishment than privilege. But if you could see your way clear to providing occasional signs that we're heading in the right direction, it would be appreciated. A burning bush would be nice, but I'd settle for a decent meal and a dry place to sleep." The sun was setting as we passed the boundary of Anatevka, that invisible line that had defined the limits of our world. Beyond it lay Russia, Europe, the world, the future. We crossed it without ceremony, without looking back, without acknowledging that we were stepping from the known into the unknown, from history into possibility, from one story into another. The fiddler played on, his melody now distant but still audible, a thread of music connecting what was to what would be. We were exiles now, refugees, wanderers in a world that didn't want us, but we were also survivors, carriers of tradition, dancers of the difficult dance, maintainers of the impossible balance. We would find new homes or build them. We would plant new roots or learn to live without them. We would adapt or perish, but either way, we would do it as ourselves, as Jews, as humans who refuse to stop being human, despite every invitation to become something less. The first night of exile found us camped by the side of the road, our possessions circled like wagons against the darkness, our fires small but sufficient to push back the immediate cold. In the distance, other groups of exiles had made similar camps, points of light in the darkness like stars that had fallen to earth, each one representing a family, a story, a continuation despite catastrophe. "Are you warm enough?" I asked Bielku, my youngest, as she huddled against her mother. "I'm cold," she admitted, "but it's an adventure, isn't it, Papa? Like the stories you tell about Moses and the Israelites wandering in the desert." "Something like that," I agreed, though I didn't mention that particular wandering had lasted 40 years and had killed everyone from the original generation except 2. Some parallels were better left undrawn. "Will we find a promised land?" she asked, her 7-year-old faith still intact despite everything. "We'll find something," I said, which was the best I could offer. Maybe not promised, maybe not land, but something. She seemed satisfied with this non-answer, curling closer to Golde and falling asleep with the enviable ease of childhood. Around our fire, others were settling for the night, their faces illuminated briefly by the flickering light. Familiar faces made strange by circumstance. Neighbors who were now fellow travelers. Friends who were now all the family we had left. "Tomorrow we reach the crossroads," Mordecai the innkeeper said. "Some will go north to Poland, others south to Galicia, still others west to Germany, will scatter like seeds in the wind." "Seeds find soil," I said, though the optimism felt forced. "They take root. They grow." "Some do," he agreed. "Others fall on stone and wither. It's a gamble, this scattering. Not all of us will survive it." "But some will," I insisted, "and those who do will carry the rest in their memories, in their stories, in their traditions. We're not just individuals being displaced. We're a people, and peoples are harder to destroy than individuals." "Pretty words," he said, echoing what I had said to Fiedka. "But will they keep us warm tonight? Will they feed us tomorrow?" "No," I admitted, "but they might keep us going when warmth and food aren't enough. They might remind us why we're trying to survive, not just that we must." He grunted, neither agreeing nor disagreeing, and turned to tend his own fire, his own family, his own fears. I did the same, checking on each of my remaining daughters, ensuring they were as comfortable as circumstances allowed, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. Later, much later, when the camp had settled into sleep and only the watchfires remained lit, I stood at the edge of our circle, looking out into the darkness that held our future. Somewhere out there, Kava was beginning her new life with Fiedka, crossing boundaries I couldn't cross, building bridges I couldn't walk. Somewhere else, Hodel was arriving in Warsaw with Perchik, ready to remake the world according to their revolutionary vision. And here, with me, were those who remained, Zeitel and Motel, facing poverty but facing it together, Sprinzu and Bielku, still young enough to adapt to whatever came next. Golde, my partner in this chaos, as in all previous chaos. "Lord," I said to the darkness, "we've left Anatevka as you apparently wished. We're wandering in our own wilderness, following a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night, though in our case the cloud is dust from the road, and the fire is our own desperate attempt to stay warm. We're maintaining our traditions, even as everything traditional is stripped away. We're keeping our faith even as faith becomes increasingly difficult to justify. What more do you want from us?" The answer, when it came, was not in words, but in music, the faint sound of a fiddle, played by someone in one of the other camps, the melody taken up by a voice here, a voice there, until it became a chorus of exiles singing in the darkness, their voices creating harmony from discord, beauty from sorrow, continuity from disruption. This, I understood, was the answer. Not that suffering had meaning, but that we could create meaning from suffering. Not that exile was good, but that we could find good even in exile. Not that tradition would save us, but that we would save tradition by carrying it with us, by refusing to let it die, even when everything else was dying around us. I returned to our fire, to my sleeping family, to the small circle of light and warmth we'd created in the vast darkness. Tomorrow we would continue walking, would face new challenges, would make new decisions about how to survive in a world that seemed increasingly hostile to our existence. But tonight, we were together. We were alive. We were still ourselves, despite everything that had tried to make us otherwise. The fiddler played on in the distance, his melody now part of the night sounds, as natural and necessary as the wind in the trees or the crackling of the fire. We would sleep to his music and wake to it, would walk to it and rest to it, would live and die to it. This eternal song of persistence, despite precariousness, of balance despite instability, of hope despite evidence to the contrary. Anatevka was behind us, already becoming memory, already transforming from place to story, from reality to legend. But we were still here, still real, still dancing our difficult dance on whatever roof the world provided, maintaining our balance through faith and stubbornness and the mysterious grace that had sustained us through centuries of such dances. The first day of exile ended with the setting of the moon, the dying of the fires, the gradual silence that comes when even grief exhausts itself and sleeps. But morning would come, as it always did, and with it the necessity of continuing, of moving forward, of finding or creating new homes in a world that offered no promises except the promise of change. We were the children of Avram, who had also been told to leave his home and go to a place he did not know. We were the descendants of those who had survived Egypt and Babylon and Rome. We would survive this too, somehow, some of us, enough of us to continue the story, to pass on the tradition, to ensure that the fiddler would always have a roof, even if it wasn't the roof we had known, even if it was a roof we couldn't yet imagine. The exile had begun. The journey continued. The music played on. Thanks for spending some time with me tonight. I hope I helped you unwind and drift a little closer to sleep. If you're enjoying these readings, there's a whole library of full books and cozy chapters waiting for you over on my Patreon. If you are already a member, then I thank you. It includes exclusive content, bonus episodes, and early access to new releases. You can also become a YouTube member if you haven't already, to listen ad-free and explore hundreds of other relaxing readings anytime you like. I'd love to have you there. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you in the next one.